Okay, thank you for that, Mike. Well, let's move on to an email. A few days ago, I mentioned CAFCAS, the organisation that provides supposedly legal representation for children in family cases. I've had a number of emails come back, but this one came in to me yesterday. It's a forward of an email from Christian Voice. It says, a Christian family need your prayers. A third baby was born on the 2nd of August at a UK hospital. Having seen stuff online, they express reservations about vaccinations, basically, and the result is that social services have taken the children. This is another very sad story, but it also says, here's a rather unpleasant twist. The mother has been expressing her milk in order to continue breastfeeding when baby is returned. But when social services allowed the couple to see their baby Friday last week, they refused to allow her to breastfeed. How cruel is that? Well, of course, I've mentioned this, and this is not unusual at all, and it's very often a sign that they intend to take the child for adoption or at least long-term fostering, and indeed it's very cruel. But let's jump from that into the BBC, and there's been an exceptionally brave lady, Patrizia Cialfi, who's been working for many years on tracking down why the authorities won't talk about child abuse. Let's have a look at WhatDoTheyKnow.com. If you go there, you can have a look at these headlines, which are all to do with freedom of information requests, failure to respond to news of child sex exploitation. This was a request into the BBC. You can see it's labelled long overdue. Evidence to support statement about child sex exploitation. This is to do with South Yorkshire Police and the Crime Commissioner. And this amazing lady, Patrizia, has been chasing these through. Evidence to support Nazir Afzal's claim about a 2008 circular about child sexual exploitation, and this one here, cover-up of child sexual exploitation by Sheffield City Council. All of these are long overdue or awaiting internal review. But let's get on to the meat of this, and this is to do with what this lady has been doing to challenge the BBC. So here's one of the responses that came into her on the 26th of June, and she's putting questions about information around the abuse of children, and the BBC is very reluctant to respond. Here's part of the response. I have reviewed the request and read the relevant correspondence, law and guidance, and liaised with staff in the relevant department. I uphold the BBC's initial decision. So not a lot of surprise there. Now, what Patrizia was upset about was that basically once she began to challenge the fact the BBC didn't want to release information they held about child sexual abuse, emails were being diverted, and this was causing the whole process to slow down. But take the point here that the BBC's own lawyer upholds the BBC's initial decision. What a surprise. Now let's bring in this lady, very, very important lady. This is Dame Elan Kloss-Stevens, DBE. She's acting chair at the moment with the BBC board, and she's responsible for upholding and protecting the independence of the BBC. Also, that the BBC maintains the highest standards of corporate governance. I'll just give you this, that she's paid a mere £160,000 per annum for a time commitment of at least 3 or 4 days a week. So that's a pretty tough job, exceptionally well paid. But she's obviously going to be looking after the BBC. And this is part of a reply that came back to Patrizia. And it says here that the acting chair, Elan Kloss-Stevens, has asked that I respond on her behalf to your email dated the 27th of July, sent via Aberystwyth University. That's where she's got some connections. As you'd already be aware, the BBC has responded to your freedom of information request and has also undertaken internal review. But basically, it says we've done everything under the Act. Now, remember that the subject of all this is that the BBC doesn't want to release information they hold around the abuse of children. So if I follow this through, it says you have been emailing various BBC departments and journalists with information for over a year. It's due to the volume of these emails from Patrizia and that the same information is being provided multiple times that the BBC had to take steps to help manage the receipt of this correspondence. Now, this is disingenuous and or untrue, because the whole problem is that the BBC won't release the information it's got. And if I just go through this a little bit more, I encourage people to go to the What Do They Know website to track this through themselves. But the reply here from Patrizia herself is, it says, in essence, your reply attempts and fails to justify what is seen as unlawful action, preventing the lawful disclosures relating to child sex exploitation. And what is all this in relation to? Well, part of it is due to a testimony from this gentleman, Nazir Afzal. He was originally working with the Crown Prosecution Service, and he was Chief Crown Prosecutor for North West England in 2011. He finally left the Crown Prosecution Service in 2015, but he actually, on a BBC programme, disclosed something very significant. Let's hear what this gentleman had to say to the public.
The wider issue, these girls were calling out this behaviour for a long time before anything was done.
Absolutely, Carolyn. If you think about it, you may not know this, but back in 2008, the Home Office sent a circular to all police forces in the country saying, as far as these young girls who are being exploited in towns and cities, we believe that they've made an informed choice about their sexual behaviour, and therefore it's not for you police officers to get involved in. If that's the landscape coming from the top down in 2008, rest assured all agencies are going to listen to it. It only changed because of the work that we did and the work that the Times newspaper did in 2010-11. The fact that we were able to bring the prosecution in Rochdale led to this investigation in West Yorkshire opening. It only opened in 2013. And the series of prosecutions that have followed indicate to me that the agencies are getting it right now. But the reality, of course, is that we've lost a generation of young girls who've been left behind and abused.
So this man said back in 2008 that there had been some form of paperwork through closing down police investigations of abuse. He was interviewed by the BBC. The BBC clearly hold documentation around this statement, but when Patrizia attempts to get the information out of the BBC, they close ranks. So I just, if we can just pop that one back on screen a second. So in information which Patrizia is talking about, she mentions Nazir Afzal here, whistleblowing in 2008, and talking about the Home Office claiming that when 11-year-old girls were being abused, actually they were making informed personal lifestyle choices to have sex with multiple elderly males from an identified demographic group on a nightly basis. And therefore, according to the Home Office, this is not an issue that the police, and by extension the Crown Prosecution Service, should be concerned with. You, the BBC, have also been presented with the very evidence demonstrating that in every case involving child sex exploitation, every public authority or quango or government institution has always refused to provide information, even when the public records show that they have it. So this lady is, I'm going to say, really going for it. I'll just pop this on screen briefly. People can freeze it. So she's talking here again about Nazir Afzal and his interview with the BBC, but of course pointing out that this also impacts on Keir Starmer. And giving another example where the BBC's been provided with evidence that Matt Dukes, formerly of South Yorkshire Police during the worst of the child sex exploitation in Rotherham and Sheffield, defiantly refuses to provide any information, even when advocating transparency to his peers, and is now a senior officer in the Met. And it goes on. And the nub of it is that the BBC is absolutely closing ranks to make sure that this lady cannot get information out of the BBC under the Freedom of Information Act. And at the end of this particular text, Patricia is saying that the victims and survivors of child sex exploitation deserve better. And I'm going to say they most certainly do, but they're unlikely to get help from the BBC that's doing everything it can to make sure that information they hold doesn't become public.
Okay.